Yeah, it's tough. I feel it's pretty surreal feeling. Just it's kind of hard to put into words right now. But it's gonna be a long off season. But yeah, it's tough to put into words right now.
The Jacksonville Jaguars turned out to be one of the most disappointing teams of the 2023 season. And in today's video, I want to review what went wrong and how the Jags can get back on track in 2024. It's really been a tale of 2 years for the team that resides in Duval County. They overhauled their coaching staff after a disastrous campaign from Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence's rookie season and brought in a good culture builder in Doug Peterson, who had success and won a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles. And in that same offseason, they brought in a handful of veterans like Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Brandon Sheriff to better support their young quarterback in a pivotal year 2 season. And that investment from the Jags organization and general manager Trent Baalke to refine the entire foundation of the franchise proved to be a success. Although they started the 2022 season slow at 2-6, they'd rally the second half of the season and go on to win 5 straight to end the year and win the AFC South for the first time since 2017. That meant they also got to host a playoff game, and they provided us with one of the best playoff matchups in recent memory, hosting the Los Angeles Chargers and quarterback Justin Herbert and coming back down 27-0 for the 3rd largest comeback in playoff history. The Jags would then travel to Arrowhead Stadium as a huge underdog against the Kansas City Chiefs and actually competed fairly well. They trailed by 3 points early in the 4th quarter, but ultimately made some mistakes down the stretch that costed them. But as a pretty young team, there grew a sense of hype around the Jaguars heading into the offseason, and the thought was that they could be a legit Super Bowl contender the following season. In March, the Jaguars didn't spend a ton of money in free agency, as they did most of their shopping in 2022, handing out a total of $175.3 million in guaranteed money. So just about all of their acquisitions were veterans on cheap deals to help patch up the roster, except for one move that was actually made during the season: the trade for former Pro Bowl wide receiver Calvin Ridley. The Jags sent a 5th and a 3rd that could end up being a 2nd rounder if they decide to re-sign him this offseason, but Ridley was supposed to be the big addition that took the Jaguars offense to the next level this year. And early on in the season for Jacksonville, the team looked exactly like everyone thought it would after the 2022 playoffs. They started 8-3, including wins against the Buffalo Bills, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Houston Texans, which were 3 playoff teams, and were in the driver's seat to win the AFC South after taking down Houston in week number 12, taking a commanding 2-game lead in the division. But contrary to the Jags' remarkable in-season turnaround in 2022, they had the opposite happen this past year, finishing the year 9-8 while losing 5 out of their last 6, while their only win coming against the worst team in the league, the Carolina Panthers. And to make matters even worse, the Jags still had a chance to take home the division crown in week 18 against the Tennessee Titans despite their losing skid, and as we all know, things did not go super well. In what turned out to be the last career game for head coach Mike Vrabel and running back Derrick Henry, they made sure to go out with a bang. As someone who watched this game from start to finish, I started getting flashbacks about prime Derrick Henry and what he used to do to the Jags prior to Trevor Lawrence joining the team. He had 153 yards and a touchdown, averaging 8.1 yards per carry on the day, and it felt like the Jags defense was uninterested in tackling him all game long. But on the other side of the ball for Jacksonville, their offense really couldn't get anything going either. Trevor Lawrence had 2 interceptions and really folded down the stretch when given a couple opportunities to steal the game. So after such a promising start to the season, the Jags were going home early. And since then, questions have arrived if Trevor Lawrence is still the quarterback that he was touted to be when he came out of Clemson, if Doug Peterson is the answer for this team at head coach, and if the window for the team has already been shut with the emergence of CJ Stroud and the Texans, and one of the more surprising teams of the year, the Indianapolis Colts, with Shane Steichen and young quarterback Anthony Richardson. So all that's to say, Jacksonville enters a very pivotal offseason to reclaim their spot atop the AFC South. Doug Peterson already has made some big moves on the coaching staff after the late season collapse, firing defensive coordinator Mike Caldwell and a multitude of other assistants on the staff. And to replace him, Peterson hired Ryan Nielsen, the ex-Falcons defensive coordinator, to be their new man in charge, and I actually do like the hire. He's a young, energetic guy that turned around one of the worst defenses statistically to a relatively middle-of-the-pack unit in one season with the Falcons, and his mantra is bringing pressure, and the Jags have a pair of very nice edge defenders in Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, so I'm excited to see how they're utilized in this new look defense. And in terms of roster construction, Trent Baalke has a few big decisions to make. The Jags are currently $17 million under the cap, but have to find a long-term solution for their best defensive player, Josh Allen. There hasn't been a ton of movement on a long-term deal, so the franchise tag might be in play, which is a guaranteed $22 million on the cap. But as there is for every team, there's a handful of ways the organization can create some cap relief, starting with left tackle Cam Robinson. Robinson is due for $22 $22 million against the cap, and on top of missing a few games for a PED suspension to start last season, even when he came back, Robinson wasn't exactly himself. Some other various moves to save cap could be to release Brandon Sheriff, who is set to make $17 million next season, veteran corner Darius Williams, safety Rashawn Jenkins, or even wide receiver Zay Jones. But probably the most fascinating decision I'm waiting to see is what the Jags decide to do with Calvin Ridley. I already mentioned the capital that they used to get him, but now they have to decide if he's worth giving up a second instead of a third-round pick while having to pay him a fairly decent contract. Ridley had a great first half of the season, but faded a little bit down the stretch, which has generated some questions if it's the right move to bring him back. But in totality, he had 76 catches for just over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. So he will be a very interesting conversation for the Jags organization before the start of the NFL draft, in which Jacksonville holds the 17th overall pick and at least 2 more premium selections, the round of course depending on the Ridley decision. And there doesn't seem to be a huge consensus at the moment on which position the Jaguars should target. As it often does, you can get a clearer image on what a team's needs are after free agency in March. And I think especially in the case of the Jags, they have so many key veterans in important positions where you'll be able to tell if they decide to bring them back or move on from them, who some legit contenders are for their selection in April. But me personally, if I'm the Jaguars, I'm swallowing my second-round pick and re-signing Calvin Ridley to be the X-wide receiver on the team. He showed flashes of still being the elite talent we saw in Atlanta, and I think in another offseason and being in the same offense and building chemistry with quarterback Trevor Lawrence, he will be even better next season. So I'm fixated on an offensive lineman or a corner as the pick. The offensive line struggled a lot to protect last season, and with some of the key decisions to be made on Robinson and Sheriff, getting another cornerstone piece next to Anton Harrison, who's going to be entering year number 2, makes a lot of sense to me. Or they could go the defensive route, which the top need on that side of the ball is to get a young corner to pair with Tyson Campbell, who I think is a stud. But the last big thing for the Jaguars this offseason is the looming question regarding quarterback Trevor Lawrence and if he should get a long-term extension. It's kind of a precedent for quarterbacks entering their 4th season to sign an extension, but there has been some talk if Lawrence has done enough to garner a new contract. Statistically, he took a slight step back last season, throwing for 4,000 yards, 21 touchdowns to 14 interceptions with a 88.5 quarterback rating. And in my opinion, I do think Trevor has carried a little bit too much hype for my liking for his play so far in the NFL. He hasn't had a season over 25 touchdowns or 4,100 yards, which is something that you would expect for a guy in top 5 quarterback conversations. But the talent is clear when you watch him play, and I believe that's where a lot of the hype and projection for him comes from. He moves around great in the pocket, and extending plays has become a nice part of his game. He's got one of the biggest arms in the league and can put the ball anywhere he wants on the field. I think at this point, he just needs to work on taking care of the ball a bit more. We've seen that be an issue whether it was in the playoff game against the Chargers or in critical moments this past season. But cleaning up those turnovers and becoming a bit more consistent will allow him to reach his full potential. And I also think giving him a bit more help up front on the offensive line should be a big objective for the organization this offseason, as he got sacked 35 times in 16 games and faced a few injuries due to some wicked shots he took. But ultimately, I do still believe that Trevor Lawrence is the franchise guy for this team, and I do think he will end up being one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL in due time. So whatever the Jags decide to do, whether that's extend him long term or accept the 5th-year option and wait another season to pay him, I think it's fair. I see both sides of the coin. But that's really my thoughts on the Jacksonville Jaguars season and things they have to consider in the upcoming months. I want to know your thoughts about the Jags and what you think they should do this offseason with some of their key decisions. Let me know in the comment section who you would draft with their top pick, what players you would release, and if you would sign Trevor Lawrence to a long-term deal. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, drop a like if you enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys in my next one.